All right. Okay, so hi, everybody. Glad to be here. This is Dennis Warren. I guess you could tell that by my name on the window. So hope everybody's doing good tonight. After the sitting, we're going to talk a little bit about both the nature and the process of awakening. And when I was first beginning to practice, you heard a lot about uh, awakening or enlightenment and aspirations to do that. And um, you don't hear that too much anymore, at least I don't. Um, and I think there's reasons for that. But I'd like to revisit that tonight, both conceptually, historically, what the idea of awakening or enlightenment is, because when you first hear the traditional model, um, it's daunting. It almost seems unimaginable. But when you take a second look, when you look and then look again, um, it actually informs or can inform our practice in some really helpful ways. And so we're going to look both at the traditional model. I'm going to kind of lay out a very simple model of awakening for the community practitioner, a process that you can use to um, make an informal evaluation of your practice and how you're doing. And then I'm going to mention two specific practices related to this. That one of which I think you may not have heard about before, not heard much about. And so we'll talk a little bit about it. In working on this, I realize that this is a topic that is probably not only the subject of a series of talks and maybe a retreat, as opposed to a single short talk on a Monday night. So I view tonight as kind of an overview to pique everybody's interest. And then if you are, there's ways to follow that up. Yeah. Okay, so we will sit for around a half hour. At the end, I have a filter here that filters out background noises, my dog barking and the train going by, and it also filters out any bell that I use. So when we get to the end of the sitting, I will just bring us out of the sitting with my voice rather than a bell. Okay, so any comments or questions before we dig in? Okay. So as a starting place, just take a moment to open to the experience that jumps out to the senses and the mind, as opposed to uh, doing some kind of formulaic or methodical process when you first begin your sitting. So if you just allow the awareness to relax, what actually happens if it's undirected? If you just allow the energy to settle and to open. For me, it's helpful to remember and to set an intention, set a theme, however you want to view it, for the sitting, and to remind yourself that um, the reason that we sit in meditation is to actually understand, to see into the nature of our different types of experiences. And if we can do that eventually, we begin to have insight into how sensations, moods, emotions, states of mind uh, arise, um, how they continue, and what conditions cause them to begin to dissipate and disappear. So if we can do this, it allows us to intentionally cultivate healthy, positive, aspirational states of mind. And it helps us see why we are experiencing the reverse and create the condition to shortcut, reduce the intensity, frequency, and eventually have aversive states of mind really move into the background. So it all starts with just opening to the experience that's taking place right now. So, where is awareness at the moment? And what is it experiencing? And notice the quality of the awareness or the consciousness that's present. You know, is it clear and alert and bright and connecting with experience that's arising in the field of consciousness? Does is there knowing of what's arising, or is something else happening, or really not happening? Uh, is the awareness and the attention more dull, uh, less focused, uh, not really connecting and penetrating experience, not distinguishing between an experience that arises, our reaction to the experience, and our thoughts about the experience. So, watching and experiencing this uh, not in a hyper vigilant way, but in a really awake way, like the mind is really seeing and experiencing and knowing what is taking place. So let's see if we can really keep the awareness and the mind and the attention alert and focused during the sitting. I'll probably give you a couple of reminders. So whatever approach, method, formula that you use in your meditation, move to that now, but see if you can use this global intention of having the consciousness being really alert, clear, connecting with experience, and knowing what is being experienced. If you are a little tired this evening, like I am, you might try. I always find it helpful to pick a particular aspect of where you're focusing your attention. So, uh, if you're focusing your attention on the breath or on the movement of energy through the body or the body as a whole, one of those various processes, uh, pick some part of it that you periodically intentionally revisit with the experiential question of whether or not the mind is really bright, that you're connecting with it, that the connection is clear, that there's a knowing quality. Um, and periodically do that throughout the setting. I find that uh, doing that, um, it will seem like I'm having a fairly bright and alert sitting, but when I intentionally go to that particular spot, maybe the beginning of the breath, the space between the in breath and the out breath, the ending of the breath, um, I realize actually my mind isn't very, very clear. And then it gives me the opportunity to take some deep breaths, um, do some small minor movements in my chair to wake the body up. If I'm really sleepy, open my eyes just a little bit, not really to look, but to get light in. Uh, Lengthen my in breath and my out breath, whatever we need to do, help us kind of get back in the process, wake up and start being awake and connecting again. Another thing that you might try to kind of double check, test the quality of your awareness is to notice whether or not you're um, still connected, that the experience that's taking place is still in the body, or if the awareness has lost its awareness of the body. So that could be, among other things, one of two primary things. The first is that the attention is narrowed down on something very tightly, such as the in breath or the out breath. Um, so that uh, even the experience of the breath moving out in the larger container of the body is lost. But if the quality of awareness is good, if we're really experiencing the different sensations while the breath is coming in and going out, and we know what's being experienced, that's an indication of good quality of awareness. If, on the other hand, you notice that the awareness is lost connection or awareness of the body as a whole, and the awareness isn't focused on anything carefully, it might be focused on the breath in a very loose way, but it's not really experiencing the different sensations, and it doesn't know what's being experienced. So in that case, it's a real good indication that the energy has dropped, that the awareness is dull, and you need something to bring the energy back up and brighten up the mind. So in the last few minutes of the sitting, I invite you to um, set an intention, bring an intention to your participation this evening of generosity and kindness for yourself, whatever may be happening for you, for others in attendance, and for all of us as a group, as a sangha. Uh, Having an intention to have a presence which is kind and generous and really appreciative of all of us being here in an open way to explore the Dharma uh, can really create an environment for things to happen, um, for us to have insight. Even if we don't say anything, our actual presence, our energetic presence can create that space. So I encourage you to put a little effort into that, both, just as we're closing this sitting, and then during the evening, during the talk, and questions and response. And so now we'll just start to, in the meditation, allow your awareness to start moving out into the body as a whole, and feeling the breath moving in the container of the body, and then spreading out into the body and the limbs, the legs, the arms, um, having things becoming more and more solid and concrete, uh, noticing the contact with the floor and with the chair or a bench or a cushion, your hands touching each other, your legs. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. So welcome back. Thank you. So we'll break for a few minutes, just maybe like 4 or 5 minutes. But I wanted to say before we break, um, the interesting thing about insight, whether it's a small insight or a large insight, or it's an awakening, it's not just that a person awakens, but there are steps where there are some small or small insights or small awakenings that cumulatively build on each other. And the thing that's so fascinating about them is that you can never predict when they're going to happen. Um, it's completely unexpected. And historically, at least when the Buddha was around, it was not uncommon for people to awaken during Dharma talks. So I want to make sure you get back in time, because you just never know what might happen on a Monday night, So we're going to break for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll dig in on this topic of awakening. So, okay, everybody. So we're going to, excuse me, I'm having a little trouble with my voice tonight. We're going to start in just a second. So if you can hear my voice, come on back into the Dharma Hall, turn on your screen. It's always good for me if you turn your screen on, because I can see people's reactions, which is helpful. Okay. So I think I'm going to start now. So it's good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I always feel really at home being at Mountain Stream. And this evening's talk is about awakening and a uh, model of awakening, a working model for community practitioners. And this is going to be a kind of an overview talk that if there are parts of this that interest you, we can uh, then drill down on them later. Uh, I can help you with some resources, um, and we can do further exploration. Okay, so at the time of the historical Buddha, reports of awakening were not uncommon. And it's always been interesting to me of when do awakening moments happen. And we placed, enormously heavy stress in Western Buddhism on meditation, but in the time of the historical Buddha, the reports are very clear that people would awaken in meditation. Um, uh, they would awaken during Dharma talks, and I had been a little humorous before the break about Dharma talks, but that is in fact many reports um, about people awakening during Dharma talks, and then during just common activities of daily life. When you drill down on the reports, what they show is that nearly all of the people who are reported to have awakened, assuming that there's some historical element of accuracy, almost all of them were living in community with the historical Buddha, which I'm sure must have been um, awfully helpful. Um, but more importantly, I think they were all involved in intense, rigorous practice. We're living a monastic lifestyle, which compared to the life of a community practitioner, it was and is abnormal. Um, really, no possessions other than the clothes that you have and a bowl for your food. A whole series of very tight rules about limiting pleasure. No music, no dancing. Um, Interactions with the opposite sex extremely limited. Uh, so it was a an absolutely monastic and strict lifestyle, and the value of it is that it provided continuous support for people focusing on their minds, mind states, and how to move towards awakening, one insight at a time. If you're interested in this at all, there's a fascinating book. It's called the Great Disciplines or the Great Disciples of the Buddha. It's edited by Bhikkhu Bodhi, and it's an interesting read. And if you take a look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about. There is no version of this in the context of community practitioner life that this was a fun lifestyle. I mean, these folks were like really serious and devoting themselves full time to the act of awakening. Historically, the way that awakening is described is in 4 stages of transformation of the mind. And unlike some of the stories that we hear or misinterpretations of the story, it is not sudden. It is a gradual development of one insight on another and another and another. And in the traditional model, it's over multiple lifetimes. It is not quick. And the stories of you'll hear somebody, a monk in a courtyard, and he's sweeping or she's sweeping, and a pebble hits a bowl, and they awaken. Um, as if that act by itself somehow was awakening. And all of those kinds of stories are really that the mind is ripe with years of intense practice, and then there is an event when the mind is open and supple and flexible and receptive. And the smallest thing can trigger an insight into the nature of reality. And then that entire lifetime of practice is triggered and a full awakening happens. Now, in contrast, there are very few historical reports of householders or community practitioners like you and me awakening. There are a few. All of them were associated with the Buddhist Sangha, did work with the Sangha. The average householder during the Buddha's life was not engaged in intense meditative work. That was not a value or a goal. Practice was more on sila, ethical conduct, generosity, relationships, and what we're told by Buddhist scholars is that householders were never exposed to the vast majority of suttas, the teachings of the Buddha, including the ones that we're studying and consider to be seminal. So it is reported that something like 70%, more than 70% of all the suttas were never exposed to householders, that they were exclusively limited to the monastic community. So, hearing all of that, that awakening primarily arose out of this intense, fundamentally isolated from everyday life living and practice. How is the traditional model of awakening relevant for us today, for you and me, if it is relevant? And how can it be helpful to us? And what is it to reasonably expect on the path towards development and awakening? And so that's what I'd like to look at tonight, because my feeling is that at the first look, it's not so clear what relevancy is. But when you look again and you look carefully, there's a great deal that's very, very helpful in helping us understand and practice and how to move forward on the path. So I'm not going to use a lot of the traditional language. I'm going to try to make this colloquial to make it a little more accessible tonight. So I'm going to start with the traditional model. And what I'm talking about is the nature of being awake, not the process of becoming awakened. So these stories where someone has awoken, well, what does that actually mean? And the traditional model, which is still the underlying model, and this is for me one of the most important parts of practice, is that it's a model of elimination or subtracting, not addition. Elimination or subtracting, not addition. And what I mean by that is that the mind lets go of the underlying causes of suffering through insight and understanding, not through intellectually figuring it out, not by replacing it with something, not by doing a lot of things. It's by letting go. And the mind slowly lets go through understanding of the underlying causes, so that the causes themselves are undermined, they're eventually uprooted and dissolved. And the image that the Buddha used, which I think is very helpful, is that awakening is like a flame slowly burning out. It's like a flame slowly burning out. So I find that really helpful, because it's an image that makes it very, very clear that we're making very small little incremental changes that over a period of time build up to a significant result. But each small one can be, and frequently is, very small. And this is the reason, like, continuous mindfulness is so important, that we keep the momentum going forward. The image or the description of the awakened mind is, imagine that you are holding a bowl in your hands. If you're in the Dharma hall, I'm sure everyone here has been in the Dharma hall. You've got the beautiful big bowl. So imagine that that bowl, the inside of that bowl is consciousness. And all of our thoughts, emotions, reactivity, everything is happening in that consciousness. Consciousness is holding it. The idea of awakening, the described end result, is that uh, all of our emotional reactivity, obstacles, limitations, the hindrances uh, disappear, that there is an absence. They're removed from this container, this consciousness. Our dysfunctional thinking, fixed views, beliefs, reactive thinking patterns that link up with emotions and cause us to suffer, those are no longer there. They're removed. And that the attachment of the mind to the idea or belief that there is a permanent self and to the belief or the desire that a permanent self can be reborn is actually absent as well. So if you were to look at the bowl after that, like if you got up in the Dharma hall and looked inside of the bowl right now, it looks like there's nothing there. And so the traditional model of awakening is that there's no craving, there's no attachment, there's no identification. Those flames have burned out. Uh, to the conventional mind, the mind that we're in right now, I think that's not only hard to imagine, but almost unimaginable. That we would have no craving of any kind, that we would have no attachment of any kind, that all of the management and control and the constant intervention of self would no longer be there as well. And we're not the only ones, if you agree with me, that's pretty hard to imagine. We're in good company because that's what the historical Buddha thought. And it's what all of the different Buddhist traditions also think, because no one, including the historical Buddha, has ever made an attempt to describe the awakened experience. The only description is that basically everything is removed. And then they use adjectives like you're off the wheel of suffering, that you're in unbounded consciousness, that you've reached the other shore. So I think that's what people's initial reactions are. But if you look again, this idea of looking and then looking again, it turns out, and this will probably almost immediately ring a bell, that there are a whole series of practices that we do, and particularly definitions of how we're asking the mind to look at our experience that are resonant and consistent with this idea of something being absent. This is a fundamental key idea in Buddhist practice and key to the idea of where theoretically we're trying to get to. So, for example, non-judgment, as in moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness, mindfulness. Non-attachment, as in do not be attached to the fruits of your labor. Non-reactivity. These are traditional descriptions, and that's pointing to the absence of something. It's not describing what its counterpoint is or some balancing state of mind. It's talking about what happens when judgment is not there. What does that state of mind and body feel like? What is it like when attachment is not present? What is it like when reactivity is not present? So in the Satipatthana Sutra, this is the most common instruction for all 40 methods of meditation. And it's, well, what causes something to be present, to continue, and to end? So what are the conditions that lead to our being non-judgmental, non-attached, non-reactive? So if we know the answers to those, then we can really practice and we can really make some changes in our lives. Another way to think of this that some people find helpful, and I find this, both of these together helpful, but I really like this, is that going back to the bowl and the Dharma hole, if you look into it and assume that uh, craving, attachment, identification, emotional reactivity, dysfunctional thinking are no longer there. So, like when you look in, if you look in it right now in this moment, it actually looks empty. And it is empty. Consciousness is empty. It's liberated from, it's released from the limitations and obstructions of emotional reactivity, dysfunctional thinking, craving, attachment, and suffering. And because that's removed, what's left is possibility and potential that doesn't have any limit on it. Because all the things that normally limit our potential as human beings, all the limits are gone. This is the definition of awakening. So this is not only aspirational, it's like really exciting, because if the obstacles and limitations are no longer there, then our view is no longer distorted, and all the space and energy that obstacles, limitations, and reactivity are taking up, that space is all freed up. And so what happens is all the factors of awakening, all of these other tools, states of mind that we develop when we practice, patience, persistence, energy, effort, investigation, kindness, compassion. There's 37 factors of awakening that fall in 7 different sets. Well, now that the space and energy being taken up with all the obstacles and limitations are no longer there, all of these factors of awakening, all of these healthy, positive states of mind can flourish because there's no limitations. And so life becomes bigger, fuller, more vivid, more interconnected, more collaborative. Okay? So this would be the a fundamental description of full awakening, when somebody's fully cooked. So what I'd like to move to is the process of how someone might get there. And I think from a practice perspective, I know what I've been looking for is a model that I find helpful, that I can use in my own life. And it's not like I'm trying to get someplace. I'm not trying to get to this rarefied place, but I do want to be on a path that I can kind of assess if I'm moving in the right direction. And it helps me understand what I'm experiencing and if I'm moving forward. So this is going to be a very generalized description of a model of a process of awakening that we can drill down on further if you're interested in it. But I find it helpful. So where I like to start with this is that U Tejaniya, the Thai monk in the Thai forest tradition, says that there are 2 things that determine the quality of our current experience, our happiness and our suffering. The first one is the momentum of everything that precedes this moment. So all those things that we just talked about, at least from a negative perspective, all of our emotional reactivity, limits, obstacles, hindrances, all of our dysfunctional thinking, fixed views, beliefs, the management and control of self, all of that are very deep habits are moving forward. And then all of the things that we've been trying to develop into new habits and patterns, kindness, clear seeing, and those together are all moving us forward. And so the idea that there is a momentum, and that what we do now with that momentum, understand it and what we do it, determines the quality of our lives. So one way to understand the path that we're on towards awakening is that it has a series of stages in it. And the first stage is that this momentum of habitual mind states and patterns, that through our practice, we start to slow it down, that we turn down the frequency, the intensity, the pervasiveness of it, and the speed, how at the beginning it just lights up. And then we start to see that it actually, the speed, the pervasiveness, the intensity, and the frequency of it actually starts to slow down. So our emotional reactivity, craving, attachment ID, they're not as often. There's still a lot of it, but in this first third of practice, it's not as often, it's not as strong, and it doesn't last as all. The experience is that we start to experience less arousal and agitation and confusion and suffering, and we start to have insight, small insights. Most of them are personal as opposed to universal, but they're significant because we're starting to see into the nature of suffering and our reactivity, and then each one of those builds on the other one, and we actually feel like some change is taking place. It may still be confusing, and we may be suffering a lot, but there's a part of us that actually realizes that the practice is starting to take hold. The second kind of big stage is that all of this practice that we're doing actually starts to work, and that the momentum changes because the amount and severity of suffering that we're experiencing is dampening down a little bit. So the space that was taking up starts to open up. It's part of the description that I gave about when you look in the bowl and if something's not there, it's suddenly open. Well, that's what we're talking about. And so we start having these periods, both individually and global, of space opening up where we can see more clearly. We actually start to see our reactivity, and we see that it's based on conditions that are interdependent. And so, even though we don't completely understand it, our suffering becomes less mysterious. And we actually begin to experience periods of non-judgment, non-attachment, and non-reactivity, not just in meditation, but in daily life. And these naturally positive qualities that we're working on start to emerge, of generosity, kindness, the paramis, the 7 factors of awakening. All that work that we're putting in starts to change the way our life feels, and we're relating to ourselves, to others, and to life itself. The insights that we start having are clearer and deeper, and because we're practicing, we're actually starting to create new habits, healthy, skillful habits, both in our meditation and daily life, that begin to slowly changing the direction of our life. And we're still preoccupied and identified with suffering and the personal nature of suffering. So that last piece is critical, that a lot of change is going on, but everything still really feels personal, and it preoccupies a great part of our life. And then there's kind of a third, these are obviously big stages, but the third stage is in my opinion where it gets like really exciting. And this momentum that we're talking about changes, and the momentum isn't from all of the historically negative habits and patterns that cause us to suffer. That's still there, but the larger momentum is all of these new habits and patterns that we've developed. to see into the nature of our life. So we begin to actually see that um, the thought patterns and reactivity and emotional patterns that we've been identifying as ourselves, as me, and that trigger the idea that it's me and I feel guilt and shame, that starts to move back. And some part of us actually realizes that all of that is not personal, that there's this underlying process. And while we may have understood that intellectually, we actually start to feel it and act like it's true because we can feel it. Our experience of life because of that starts to change. Our perception, our understanding, and our relationship. You know, we start to feel that life and our relationships are more vivid, larger, deeper, more open, more spacious, and the sense of ego or self constantly being in the forefront, uh, managing and controlling everything, uh, just starts to become less and less an issue. It doesn't disappear, but as with the image of the flame starting to slowly burn out, um, the drama just keeps getting less and less. And where before this, the ego and the self is right here in front, managing and controlling it's all about me. That starts to move into the background in the same way that with thinking, if our practice is working right, we're sitting in meditation, thoughts come up, we keep our attention in the present experience, and the thoughts just move into the background. They don't disappear, but they're in the background and they're not really intervening and causing trouble all the time. And what goes along with that, it's kind of a package of interrelated events that take place, is that um, how we're identifying ourselves, and this is intuitive, starts to change. Uh, Rather than feeling separate because of all the management and control of the ego or the self, we start intuitively shifting to recognizing and feeling interconnected, interdependent, and moving more towards a collaboration with life and others than with trying to manage and control life and our suffering. So these changes happen globally in the sense that over a period of time, this whole process, the suffering starts to go down, the healthy qualities come up, and the clear seeing starts to come up, and the nature of our relationship changes. Um, and, as I said earlier, it's a very gradual process. Um, it happens more clearly with individual issues. I'm sure all of you can think of a situation, some issue that you had in your life that was a real problem at some point, and then you really worked with it and practiced with it, and it's not much of an issue anymore, or it's not an issue at all. Um, and it's a direct result of the amount of time and effort that was devoted to working with it. So, for most community practitioners, this whole developmental process is uneven because we're not in an environment where we're getting continuous support or we're continuously focusing on these kinds of issues. So there will be pockets of our life where we've made like real progress. And then there will be other areas where we haven't made much progress at all because we haven't paid much attention to it. So um, all of this points for me to two different practices that I would like to suggest. Um, the first one is a practice of reflecting on intentionally doing this, setting time aside and doing it outside of meditation or inside, but reflecting on and recognizing and appreciating the development in these areas that have actually happened in your life and in your practice. And my guess is that everyone here can look back on their life since they started practice and identify a an issue that was significant. It was a troubling issue. And that through practice, um, it's either significantly diminished, so it's no longer problematic, it's manageable, or it's just completely dissolved. You think about it and it no longer causes arousal or agitation. You're no longer attached to the narrative. You're no longer identified and defensive when you think of that, or someone else talks about it. And I know in my case, without going into specifics, when I started working on this part of the talk, just immediately, uh, I thought of two things I haven't thought about in years, and both of them, one in my late teens and one in my early 30s, were significant events that were enormously challenging and destabilizing for me, and went on for years, between 4 and 8 years. Uh, Constant turbulence, um, really, really difficult life events. And what struck me when they came up was that they came up as thoughts, and I had absolutely no emotional reaction to them at all. I mean, like none. No emotional reactivity, no uh, dysfunctional thinking. I mean, not even any, no blame, no guilt, no shame, none of that. Just it's something that happened, and I can see it really clearly now. And it's also very clear to me that that is uh, the result of intensive work with this practice, and working with several of my teachers specifically on these events. So I think all of us, to one degree or another, can think of something like this. And I know that I look back at the young man who began practicing this practice in the late the late 60s, the early 70s, and I just have so much compassion for that person. They were suffering so much, and that person doesn't exist anymore. And so uh, this is really a healthy thing to do, because uh, you can actually see in your own life and your own experience that you are on the path, and at some degree the path is changing your life, and that at some degree you are awakening and have had minor events of awakening that have resulted in um, helpful or significant change in your life. And I know in my case, reflecting on this in this way just gives me an enormous sense of confidence in the practice. Um, there's just no question of its value and its efficacy and its place in my life. It's not an idea. It's not a concept. I mean, it's a lived experience. So this is something that's quite precious, in my opinion, and something that if we develop it, um, is really wholesome and helpful. So that's the first practice. The second practice is what's called, or what I'm calling, the practice of momentary awakening. And Buddhadasa, who was a Thai teacher, he had been a very, very successful merchant, businessman, and then he became a monk, and he ended up becoming a very well-known teacher. You may be, or may not be, familiar with a number of books of his teachings. He's a fantastic teacher. And what Buddhadasa led with uh, was the idea that we actually have moments of awakening in sitting and in daily life, but we don't recognize them. And so what would that be? And what Buddhadasa said, and you can test this out for yourself, it's actually a practice, and I consider it to be much like this other one, a really, really helpful practice, is that there are times in sitting and during life that if we were aware of them, if we woke up to them, where there's no emotional reactivity going on, there is no craving or attachment or identification, there's no dysfunctional thinking going on, and there's no management and control and disruption of a sense of self, of I, me, mine. And because that's not there, once again, back to the bowl of, and it's empty of those things, that what's happening is for moments, not long extended periods of time, but for moments, consciousness and awareness are empty of reactivity, dysfunctional thinking, and identification, which allows awareness to directly experience what's happening without filters, hindrances, or interference. And so Buddhadasa's contention, and I've worked with this a lot, and from my own experience, I believe it to be true, is that this actually is happening. And because we haven't trained ourselves, our society, and actually I think our practice in a way, trains us to look for stimulation, to look for suffering. It doesn't train us to look for the absence of something that's not there. And when it's not there, our mind's response is to classify it as, well, there is nothing there, which in fact is the whole point. But it's exciting that it's not there, and to explore it. So like the practice of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Well, actually being able to experience neutral and that something's not there. Craving's not there, attachment is not there. So this practice is very different from looking for suffering or the causes of suffering. This is a practice of waiting for moments and recognizing them when craving, attachment, identification, self are not present. And so the experience of that is what? It's experiences a moment of non-judgment, non-attachment, non-reactivity, and consciousness that is open and unbounded. So the mind is just as at rest, directly experiencing, seeing clearly, no obstacles and limitations, just possibilities. And so if we could actually do this, if we could actually see it, we start seeing it, it informs us about what the nature of the awakened life might be. That when consciousness is empty of these things, what's left is possibility, is potential. And so if when these mind states arrive and we can wake up to them, we could train ourselves and we could explore, like, well, what does this feel like? What does it feel like without having judgment, without attachment, non-reactivity? And what conditions cause that to arise and to continue? And then we've really got something, because we can actually recognize, begin to understand, and cultivate these specific qualities that lead to awakening. So this is like potentially like a very precious thing. And when could this happen? So just hearing all of that, you think, well, yeah. I mean, we're talking about this very intense thing in meditation, and that's not it at all. Buddhadasa was saying these happen in myriad activities, in meditation, in listening to a Dharma talk, when you're washing the dishes, when you're taking a shower, when you're walking the dog, when you're cooking dinner, when you're gardening, when you're taking a pause during the day and your mind relaxes, and you're just having a coffee or tea or a glass of wine, that these experiences are waiting for us. We can't make them happen, we have to be awake to the possibility and watch for them. And then when they appear, um, to experience them and explore them. So let me see here. Okay. So I think I'm going to end there, and we've got just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes for questions, comments, thoughts. Um, so on Zoom or in the Dharma Hall, are there comments that you have or thoughts? Or
So if you're on Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand or your real hand and we'll find you. And if you're in the Dharma Hall, just raise your hand because you don't have a virtual hand.
And Adam, we have a question on Zoom.
All right, Philip, go for it.
There we go. Thank you. Not so much a question, just a statement. Thank you, Dennis, for this talk tonight. For me, this has felt like one of the most powerful Dharma talks I've heard in quite a while. I actually feel much more optimistic about what felt like the minuscule progress rather, I was making. And, and I've often, when I talk about my experience and my presence with the center, as I look back the last 4 years, I've recognized that I'm a lot less reactive than I used to be. And I would just like toss it off as, oh, that's a nice thing. But now I'm realizing it's much more powerful and much more meaningful. And the way you've talked about it made it much more important and quite a much greater realization for me. So thank you very much.
yeah, well, thank you, Philip. And I feel exactly the same way. And I'm glad you said that, because that was kind of like my hope in giving this talk, is that we're actually making, all of us, more progress than we think we are. And unless we're working with, a teacher who is working with us and pointing things out, the changes are so gradual that we don't recognize them frequently. Sometimes we will, you'll have an experience and it's like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, like 2 years ago, if that had happened, I would have been like upset for a week. And, now I was only upset for a half hour. But there's all these other things that are happening where there's one small little insight after another, and they're just building on top of each other. And it's that cumulative momentum. So.
All right, anybody in the Dharma Hall have a question or a
Okay,
comment?
other thoughts? It's okay if there's objections.
Any objections?
Adam, for us on Zoom, it's really hard to hear you.
Oh.
So maybe make sure that if whoever's asking a question to talk right into the microphone.
Okay. It feels kind of loud in here, so maybe there's some adjustment I can make on the, yeah.
Hey, Dennis, it's Robert here. During the guided meditation portion, when you were encouraging alertness, I noticed that my monkey mind kind of quieted down a bit, and in trying to figure that out, it almost seems like the alertness is using a different part of the brain, or it's more physical in nature. Any
I
thoughts
think
about
one
that?
way to think, yeah, I think one way to think of this is that um, if you can allow your energy not just to settle and get sleepy, but to consolidate, so that you've got alertness and you've got energy, then you've got a real chance of focusing your attention into something, and the attention really examining it. So if the mind's really alert, It has an ability, for example, to examine the different sensations of the in-breath at a level that if it's kind of dull, it will completely miss. So if your mind's more alert, it's more interested and curious in the actual experience that's taking place, so that the thinking starts to move into the background. So the thinking doesn't go away, but it's just no longer problematical. And sometimes the thinking will just completely calm down, and other times it's just kind of rolling at this very much more quiet level in the background. So this is, the Buddha there's a sutta where the Buddha recommended 5 specific strategies for difficult thinking. And the first one is when you start having, a thinking attack, to shift your attention to another object that is stronger, and your mind, you have a better chance of paying attention to. So you hear all these strategies of, okay, move your attention to the breath, or start doing a body scan, but doing it fairly quickly, where you're just hitting touch points of your feet, your hands, your back, moving around. And what that tends to do is the attention is like, oh, okay, we're really looking now. And the attention moves over to the actual sensory experiences that is taking place rather than the thinking. So the combination of the mind being alert and then trying to stay in the various forms of sensory consciousness, you've got a good chance of having thinking staying in the background or not being that problematic, even when you have one of those days or nights where there's a lot of thinking. Does that help a little bit?
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, so I was just looking at the time here, and I wish we had more time for questions and answers if there are. I always really love this part, but I'm just going to do a little quick dedication of merit, and then we'll have one of the Mountain Stream staff talk a little bit about announcements, I think. Yeah. Okay. So I'd really like to thank all of you for being here tonight, and thank you for your intention and your kindness and your generosity. It's always a gift for me to be able to be here at Mountain Stream. And may the cumulative momentum of our good intentions and our effort this evening, and any merit that arises from that, contribute in some real way to reduce the amount of suffering in the world just a little bit, and bring just a little happiness into the lives of so many people who are suffering right now. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dennis.